What's up, PRC Nation? I'm James Stanley. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager for Phantom Racing Chassis. Today we're going to go over how to assemble your new Phantom chassis from start to finish, step by step. Now if you notice, I'm not at Phantom. I'm actually at my shop, at my home. The reason we're going to do this is because this is by a racer for our racers. We're going to go over step by step how to assemble your new chassis just as you would in your own shop. Now this is steps and procedures I've learned over the last almost 20 years of racing. May not necessarily be the exact way you do it, may not necessarily be the way you want to do it, but this is the way I do it. It's proven to work for years and years. Won a lot of races. I've probably assembled over 100 carts since I've been with Phantom. So follow along. We're going to go over, again, step by step, the assembly process from start to finish, exactly how it comes off the factory floor. Now, let's get started.
All right, now before we get started, let's go over everything that comes with the cart. Obviously, you're going to get your standard cart kit. It's got your seat mounting hardware, steering shaft, fairing bracket, steering post, steering wheel, and obviously all your nuts and bolts are, right in these packages right here. Going over here, we got startup kit. This is an option added on by the customer. This includes the rear floor pan. Obviously, you got your catch can, all your throttle assembly, your fuel tanks here. I think that's it for the startup kit. Obviously, you got your bubble, you got your motor mount. Over here, we got our medium seat and red body. So let's go ahead and crack into our cart kit here. It's gonna be your right side seat strut. Left side seat strut. Your steering shaft, if I can get it out. Steering shaft. Steering post fairing. And then here's the heart and soul of your cart kit. Kit right here is every nut and bolt to assemble, so make sure you keep track of that. This customer added pedal grips, we'll get those on. Obviously you got your startup kit, we're not going to need that right now. We're going to go over everything that's in that startup kit. Just toss that down for now. Alright, so there's your cart kit and everything in it. Alright, let's go ahead and put our steering in the cart. The first thing I do, cut that. Now what I normally do is run these jam nuts all the way in on either side, and then actually run the tie rod all the way against the jam nut. Essentially what that does is it allows the either tie rod end to have the same amount of threads exposed on either side when you do back it out. Obviously if it's all the way to the jam nut, it has no other choice but to have an equal amount. So it really doesn't have to be done. It's just more from a visual standpoint. You know that your rod ends have the same amount hanging out. So let's just go ahead and run those in. So just run it all the way until it stops. Alright, now next thing I'll do is start with the steering post. I normally grab a little bit of grease. just lightly put a little grease on there. The only reason you're wanting to put that grease on there is that way the steering posts don't get stuck to the weld-on piece that holds it. Obviously, you get water and stuff in there, it'll rust. So, go ahead and slide your steering post on there. Kind of move that grease around a little bit. Like I said, that's more of a preventative measure to keep it from getting rusted on that post. Now, let's go ahead and pop open our bolt kit here. There's your seat mounting hardware, there's your steering wheel hardware, steering lock kit, there's your steering yoke, and your sprocket hub bolts. As of right now, we don't need the sprocket hub bolts or the seat mount bolts, so let's just throw these back on the table. And let's focus on our steering components. So, all right. So right here, this 1/4-inch bolt, the only 1/4-inch bolt in that particular pack. This is the bolt that holds the bottom of your steering shaft, or your steering post, I should say. Go ahead and slide that in. Grab your 1/4-inch washers. Make sure you have a washer underneath the head of the bolt and the nut. Thread it up on there. Grab your 7/16 wrench, 7/16 socket. I tighten that down pretty good so that way you don't have any slop in your post. Let's go over here on this side. Make sure you're cotter pinning everything that has a hole in it. Cut your cotters. All right, so our steering post is installed now. We can start working on, actually let's go ahead and thread the yoke in there. Slide your jam nut up on your yoke. I usually run it most of the way down. Customers can adjust that up or down however tall they want to run the, however tall they want to run the steering shaft. Obviously, you can go up and down. Always put a little grease on the threads there. Again, preventative, just so it don't get rusted up in there. At this point, we're just going to thread it in. We're not going to tighten it just yet. So let's just go ahead and run it in there. We'll tighten it up once we get the steering shaft and the steering lock and all put on. All right, so go ahead and put that in there. Let's grab our steering shaft. Now, I get questions quite a bit what this does right here. If you thread this in more, obviously your steering shaft's going to be more at an angle, which you can see where it'll put the steering wheel. Obviously you go that way, it's going to be straighter. Normally I like to run them about halfway. That's where Tony usually sets them from factory. That's usually where I leave them. Again, we're just snugging that jam nut up with our finger for now until we get everything finalized. Get that out of the way. All right, so grab this is a 5/8 slotted nut. This goes on the bottom of your steering shaft. Actually, I'm sorry, this is a 1/2-inch nut. It goes in the bottom of the steering shaft. Make sure you grab your 1/2-inch washer right here. Thread it up there. This will require a 3/4-inch wrench. Go grab it. Go ahead and tighten it down. Now make sure that your hole lines up for your cotter pin. This has to be cotter pin, so get your hole lined up. Sometimes you can leave it just a little bit loose. Obviously, it's not going to go anywhere with the cotter pin in it. Probably a tight fit, so you probably need to go ahead and knock your cotter pin in there. cotter pin. That one worked up a little bit. Always good to have extra cotter pins laying around. Again, make sure your hole's lined up. Push it in there. Throw this other one out. Now, I like to do it before the tie rod's in, so that way you can turn it over and cut your cotter pin. If your tie rods are in, obviously, it makes it harder to get underneath there. So you usually do it before the tie rods are in. Go ahead and cut your cotter pin off. That way you're not getting cut on it. All right. Now, attaching the tie rods. I see this probably more often than anything where it's improperly stacked. Obviously, take your large flat washer, put it against the head of the bolt, start that in there. Now, we always recommend to run 2 washers on either side of the heims and actually run the heims against each other. So let me see where you guys can see this. 2 of your AN, your small outside diameter washers, go first. Sorry, this is we need to put the left side on top. So you got 2 washers, left side tie rod on top, your right side, and then 2 more of these small AN washers. It just keeps everything from getting bound up, so you have some gap between the pitman arm and the tie rods. Take your 3/8 washer, regular flat washer, and then your castle nut at the bottom. Go ahead and thread that up. Go ahead and get your cotter pin and all lined up. Grab your 2 9/16 wrenches. See where you're at with your cotter pin. Go ahead and get this tight. You don't want to leave this loose where you got play in your tie rods. Obviously, it's not good for setting your toe and all. Go ahead and push that in there. All right. Now your tie rods are installed. All right. Now on the size, you have the adjustable block down here. You can't really do anything with that until you get your steering block, and I'll put it in and see where the height is. Basically, you're looking to level the tie rods. They don't have to be completely level. You don't have to put a level on it. You want to make sure, first of all, they're level with the ground, and they're not at an angle this way. And you can see where the left side tie rod's in a little bit. So we'll fix that in just a minute with these bolts. Let's go ahead and get the steering block put on so that way we can see our angle of the steering shaft. So in your steering lock, you got the block itself. This is what we call the lock, and then you got your pin. Slide your block down first. At this point, you don't have to worry about the lock or the pin. We're only worrying about the height of the steering shaft. I'm gonna go ahead and mount it down. This is a stock driver, so I'm assuming that a little bit smaller. Go and line up your hole there. I'm not even gonna put the other side in. Again, we're just setting this to see where our heights are in regards to the lower steering block. So as you can see, the levelness of the tie rods actually looks pretty good. The whole shaft needs to come back just a little bit, so that way they're not at an angle like this. So let me grab a 1/2 inch. We're just gonna pop these loose. Just loose enough where you can move it. Obviously, you don't have to take them completely out. All right. Now take this, just move it back some where you get where you get everything this way as straight as possible. As you can see right there, that looks like a pretty good spot. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up right there. Again, everything looks fairly level in regards to the ground and the angle of the steering shaft. So go ahead and tighten that up. Now, if you're happy with the position of your steering shaft in regards to the height, what I would recommend to do at this point, so you don't forget to do it, is go ahead and safety wire these two bolts together. They have to be safety wired. Grab a little bit of safety wire and safety wire them together. Find your hole, just go a little bit longer than what you actually want. So you can see just a little bit longer than the length, because obviously it's going to shorten up when you safety wire them. Alright, you can see it lines up the hole just about right. Run that through. Here's an old trick I've been taught a few years ago. Go ahead and cut this extra length off right here and leave your braided part and grab it with the end of your pliers. So what this is going to end up doing is rolling it into a ball and actually give it a clean cut where you don't have a sharp edge. So just go ahead and twist your pliers with your hands. Go ahead and twist them, twist them, twist them. You see that ball forming? Keep twisting until it breaks off. It's nice and smooth and it looks good. Again, not something that you have to do, just an old trick that makes it look good and gives it a nice clean cut right there. So, all right, so the bottom of your steering shaft's installed. You got your tie rods installed. All this is installed. Obviously, this is loose. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that. What I normally do is set it where it's kind of at this angle a little bit. That way, when you do tighten it, the jam nut will actually push the heim that way. Let's go ahead and leave it at that angle a little bit. Like a 3/4 inch wrench. See how it moves it? Go ahead and tighten it. You want that heim to have about the same clearance all the way around. Now, it don't have to be, but it'll keep it from getting bound up. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now, the reason I said not to go ahead and put the washer and the bolt or the nut on that is because we got to put the fairing bracket on. So let's go ahead and install the fairing bracket. Slide that on there. Washer, nut. This is a 5/16 nut and washer combination with the bolt. Obviously grab a 1/2 inch. Grab your 1/2 inch wrench. Oh, actually put that on backwards. Now make sure, you see what I just done there. Make sure that this angle and all is pretty well flat. Obviously the micron bracket should be on the other side. That was a little mistake on my part. Let's go ahead and move that around. All right, so now we got it in the right position here. Now I'm not gonna go super tight with it because we're gonna mess with the angle a little bit later when we get that fairing on. Back that off just a little bit. So we're just gonna kind of mock it up. Again, when we put the fairing on, we'll be able to figure out what that angle is actually gonna end up being. So, all right. Now, I said earlier, we're gonna leave this nut right here loose. Obviously it's still loose. I like where the position is of the steering shaft, so we're gonna go ahead and tighten it. Again, this is just another trick I've learned. To keep this from getting bound up, obviously if you just take this and tighten it, you see what it does. You see where it kind of tries to bind that and move the steering yoke? So what I do is I take a 9/16 wrench, slide in that gap right there, 1/2 inch, just enough to fill that gap. You can see it right there. That way when you go to tighten it, it's not trying to move it over. It just keeps it from trying to turn. So go ahead and just snug up your jam nut. Again, keep your wrench in there, snug it up. Make sure it's tight so it's not gonna move. Take that out. Steering should be good and free. All right, now we got that done. Let's go ahead and slide our steering lock on here. Should slide right down. Grab your steering pin. This will require a 5/32 Allen wrench. Now before you go ahead and tighten this, let me clear these tools out real quick. I want you to look at something. All right, to set your steering lock, you want to make sure that this is straight down toward the ground, basically a 90-degree angle. You don't want it, set like that or like that. You just want to set it as close to a 90-degree angle as possible. Looking down, that looks pretty good right there. Obviously, make sure that your pin is in. Go ahead and snug this Allen wrench up, or this Allen head bolt up right here. Again, 5/32. Tighten it up. Tighten it up good so it don't move on you. Now your steering lock is set. Next up we have is our steering wheel. Got our steering hub and all the components in it. First thing I do so I don't forget before I even try to assemble the steering wheel is put this snap ring on. This will prevent the steering wheel from trying to slide down on the shaft. So it's very important. It's a very important safety measure. So let's go ahead and grab a pair of small snap ring pliers and put that on there. All right, you can see your snap ring is installed. It goes in that little groove right underneath the splines. Once you get it on there, you should be able to freely move it. All right, let's go ahead and put our steering wheel on there. What I normally do is just set the hub up on there about where it's gonna be. Grab your steering wheel. Now these hubs have 2 different bolt patterns on them. If you notice, go ahead and line up the steering wheel. If you notice that bolt pattern isn't exactly right, the bottom hole is not gonna line up. So we gotta take and pivot it to the next bolt pattern, which will line up. And I just do this for mock-up purposes. Now our steering wheels are slotted. You can go to the right, you can go to the left. I normally put them right in the center. Obviously, if you run like concrete stuff, you can slide it over to the left more. If you run on lower bite stuff where you got the steering wheel over to the, or the seat over to the right more, you can run the steering wheel over to the right. So I usually like to just set them center. Go ahead and put your bolts in there. These are 1/4 inch bolts, so you're gonna need a 7/16 socket and wrench. Start your nuts. Now I find it easier to just go ahead and tighten this up while it's sitting on the steering shaft. You can hold everything a lot better than trying to hold the steering wheel and all, trying to tighten that down. So let's grab a 7/16, our impact, and a wrench. All right. Now, with your open end area of the wrench, put it on your nut. If you put the closed end on there, the back of the hub is pretty tight and you can actually get the closed end stuck in there. So use your open end. I usually go ahead and push the bolt out and hold the nut with my finger with the open end on the nut. That way you can see where the bolt's sticking out. Go ahead and grab it with the head, or the socket with the head of the bolt, and run that. Again, a little bit at a time, make sure it's where you want it. It's about centered right there. Go ahead and tighten it up. Now the back of the steering wheel, you have to have cotter pins in here. So try to get it where it'll line up where you can get the cotter pin in the hole. I usually take the wrench and just turn it ever so slightly to make sure that the hole lines up where you can get the cotter pin in there. And then do the same process for all three. Tighten them up. Cotter pin's good on that one. Tighten this one up. Cotter pin's good. Take your steering wheel off. Put your cotter pins in each one. Some of these holes, sometimes they can be a little bit tight, so just kind of got to knock it in there. Now you can see where that one's going into the hub. So let's grab our 7/16 wrench that Blue just dropped on the floor. Go ahead and take and move that so where it's not into the hub. So I just barely moved it. That should be good. Cut your cotter pins off. Now your hub is attached to the steering wheel. Pop your steering wheel up on there. Line it to your splines. Obviously stand back, make sure it's at a good angle. That's pretty close right there. Put your 1/2" washer, same as the bottom of the steering shaft. Castle nut, 1/2 inch. Every 3/4 inch wrench. I like to go ahead and pop the steering pin out. That way when you go to tighten it, it's not trying to move. So you can actually just hold the steering wheel and tighten it. So go ahead and tighten it up pretty good. Line up your hole. See where the hole's lined up there. Cotter pin. Make sure you cotter pin everything that has a hole in it. Obviously we want to have holes and cotter pins for no reason. It's, you know, it's a safety issue. So knock that through. Cut it off. All right, steering wheel is installed. Now along this same deal, you got your fairing bracket here. You can go ahead and mount this now. I usually do, because you can actually line it up, you know, with your steering shaft in the front of the car. It don't necessarily have to be mounted with the body. So with that being said, you will find your fairing mounting hardware in your body bolt kit. Go ahead and take your Dzus kits out. Dzus kits. Now in this hardware kit, you got your fairing bolts. Take everything out. Fairing bolts are 1/4 inch bolts, 1 inch long. So obviously you can see they're quite a bit different than your regular body bolts. So grab your long 1/4 inch bolts, 2 rubber grommets. Grab your 1/4 inch washers, obviously a little bit bigger than your number 10 washers. Grab 4 of those, and your 2 1/4 inch nuts. Now what I normally do is dab a little bit of glue, a little bit of super glue on either grommet. Go ahead and clamp it on here. You know, that way when you go to mount your fairing, that stuff ain't moving around. So let's go ahead and grab some glue. A couple clamps. It don't have to be much, just a little bit of super glue. On either side. A little bit. Line up your hole, make sure everything looks good, hold it on there. Get your clamp. Clamp it up. Same thing on the other side. Good to go. Now let's go ahead and wait for that to dry. I'll get some things cleaned up. We'll go ahead and get back here and mount the fairing, and we'll continue with our video. All right, we've waited a couple minutes. Glue should be dry enough to hold the rubbers on there now. So go ahead and take your clamps off. Now while that was drying, I went ahead and took the time to grab a 17/64 drill bit, which is 1 size above the 1/4 inch. Got it ready. Grab me a Sharpie, the 5/32 Allen wrench we used prior for the steering lock, and then the 7/16 wrench, obviously with your nuts and bolts for the fairing. Everything's there. So let's go ahead and peel this off the fairing. Go ahead and get it set up, mocked up. Make sure we get everything how we like it. Now what I normally do is count each line over and make sure we're even on both sides. So I'm at 1, 2, 3 lines. So I'm in between the second and third line on that side, second and third line on the other side. I just take a step back, make sure it's pointing in the direction I want it to. To me, it looks like it's skewed over that way a little bit, so let's go ahead and fix that. For the most part, I want it pointing basically right down the center of the front bumper, maybe to the left just a little bit. You want it pointing straight down the track. You don't want it angled one way or the other. Like I said, you want a good flat angle. You don't want it leaning down, leaning up. Right there, it looks like it's in a good position. Again, count your lines, make sure everything is centered so it's not, you know, tilted that way or that way. Grab your Sharpie. Come over here. Look at your hole, go ahead and mark right on top of it. Mark 1. Go ahead and mark your second. Again, make sure that none of this stuff's moving around when you mark it. Both of my holes are marked. Again, 17/64 drill bits, 1 above the 1/4 inch. Here's the hole. Clean them out just a little bit. All right. 1/4 inch washer. 1/4 inch Allen head bolt. Pull off any excess plastic if you got any Lexan, whatever you're gonna call it. Slide your bolt in there. Again, washer, then nut, and just nut finger tight it on that side. Come over to your other side. Same process. Washer under the head of the bolt. Washer on the back side, then your nut. 5/32 Allen wrench, 7/16 wrench. Go ahead and snug them down. Now these you want to where you just barely compress the rubber and so that the bolt is through the lock on the nut. So you can feel it on the back side. I got my finger. You can feel when the nut comes through. That's all you need to tighten. You don't need to tighten down any more than that. Obviously, if you really tighten it up, you can actually see where fairings get broken. Just tighten it up enough where, again, the bolt comes through the lock nut. I can feel it on that side. It's good to go. Your fairing is now mounted. All right, the next step in our process is our rear floor pan. This customer added the optional startup kit, which includes the rear floor pan and the bolt kit. So we're gonna go ahead and install that. Now, some people prefer the fiberglass, some people prefer the metal floor pans. These are, to me, much easier to work with. The holes are already pre-drilled. It's got rubber grommets in there, so there's no binding issues. Just really a great piece. So let's go ahead and put this in there. Pick up the rear of the cart, slide it underneath. Now make sure that the rear floor pan overlaps the front floor pan. See where it's on top of it. Make sure it's on top of the front floor pan. The reason Harold done that is for when you're going that way on the track, it's not catching the front of the rear pan. Obviously, in years past, we used to have them where they were not overlapped, and sometimes on rough racetracks, it would actually rip the rear floor pan completely out of the cart. So, now that we've got it in there, take your large flat washer. This is going on the back side. Put it underneath the head of the bolt. Line up all your holes. It don't really matter where you start. I'll go ahead and start with this one on the left side here. And just line it up. Pop it in there. Grab your regular flat washer. Then your nut. Now I'm just running the nut on there enough to hold it in place. We're not going to tighten anything until we get all the bolts in place. So, same process. We'll go over to the right side. Flat washer always on the bottom. I'm sorry, the big fender washer always on the bottom. Again, these floor pans, they are laser cut, and the holes are laser cut out as well. So they're in the exact same place every single time. Same as our chassis. It's all made on a robot. Every single floor pan tab is in the same spot. So everything should line up every single time. Now that all the bolts are in place, we're going to grab an 1/8 inch Allen wrench, 3/8 regular wrench. Go ahead and tighten them up. You can use an impact on this. I don't really like to because I don't want to get them over tight. So just go ahead and tighten them up until you see that bolt come through the lock nut. You don't want to leave them so loose that the pan's rattling around. You just want to snug them up. All you're doing here is snugging them up. Again, don't over tight, don't under tight, snug them up. Let's go over to the right side. All right, floor pan is installed. Now we are missing one critical element. A lot of people seem to overlook or, don't see it in the owner's manual. But if you notice, there's 3 holes right here. 1, 2, 3. They're actually designed for if you do spin out. Again, earlier we were talking about that overhang where it would actually rip the pan out. If you spin out, the cart's going the opposite direction. So you have the front pan sitting underneath the rear pan. And again, you can actually have the front pan ripped out or bent up. So these 3 holes right here, they're designed to keep the 2 pans attached. So the overhang or the lip is minimal. You're pressing them up against each other so it has a good tight edge. So you can either take a couple bolts, rivets, however you want to do it. I'm going to go ahead and just grab a couple bolts and go ahead and tighten those 2 up. Again, you can use the same type of bolt that you use for your floor pan. This one came with 1 extra. These holes can be a little bit tight. All right, so we got that up in there. And tighten that one. Now again, you don't have to bolt it, you can rivet it. Whatever process you prefer. Since I got a bolt right there and I have some extra bolts laying around, I'm just gonna go ahead and bolt them. Snug them up, grab another bolt. Alright. Now at this point, I'm gonna leave the center one out because they can actually get in the way of your seat mounting. The seat might sit right in that same exact area. So we're just gonna leave that out for now until we get done mounting the seat so it doesn't get in the way. And then when we're done, we can probably run a rivet or a short nut in there. Let me actually get on the other side. Again, these holes can be tight, so you may have to thread the nut or the bolt actually up in the hole. Let's go ahead and grab the wrench and thread it up in there. And tighten it down. All right, now both of your pans are in. Next thing we're gonna work on is mounting our seat. All right, now if you noticed earlier in our cart kit, I mentioned we got both of our seat struts, seat mount bolt kit. That's really all we're gonna need to do our next process, which is mounting the seat. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing to do is go ahead and pop your seat mount bolt kit apart. Lay everything out. Obviously for your struts, you need your 2 clamps. And you'll need all your 1/4 inch nuts and bolts. So grab, there should be 8 nuts, 8 bolts. Go ahead and separate those. Obviously your smaller nuts are your 1/4s. So that's 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. So we got everything we need. Go ahead and get the struts put on the cart. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright. I usually pick up the rear of the cart. That way it gives it a little bit of a give right there. Go ahead and slide your clamp in there. Slide it over some. Right rear seat strut. At this point, we're just run the nuts up on the bolt just to get them in position. lean it toward the front. Go ahead and put your back bolts in there. Again, just threading them up on there. That's all we're doing right now. Move over to your left side, same process. Now, before we actually mount the seat, let me go ahead and say that seat mounting is probably the most critical aspect as far as what you're actually putting on the cart, because it holds all your cart's weight for the most part, other than the cart itself. You got your driver, you got your lead, everything's on the seat. So it's very critical that you don't bind this up. You want to make sure it's in the correct location. If you need any help with any of that, you can always call Phantom. You can call your nearest authorized dealer, and we'll be happy to get you pointed in the right direction. So with that being said, in this instance, we're going to go ahead and mount a medium seat. So I know from experience that this measurement right here should be 3.5 inches. That's from the edge of the clamp to the edge of the inside motor rail, so edge to edge. So let me grab a tape measure real quick. We're just shy of 3.5. Let's move it out just a little bit. That's about where we want to be. So since that's where it's should be, I'm gonna go ahead and just snug it up. Again, we're not tightening it up, we're just snugging it up so it don't move when I go ahead and put the seat in there. So grab a 7/16 socket on the Allen wrench, on the impact wrench, and a 7/16 wrench. Just a little bit at a time, just enough to where it'll get snug up. Now we do it a crisscross pattern, so it gives it a even tightness all the way around. So try to go back and forth in a crisscross pattern as you snug everything up and as you tighten it up as well. Just a little bit at a time, enough where it don't move on you when you go to mount the seat. Just a little bit at a time. As you can see, I can still move it, but it can't go side to side. So that's about where you want it. Now, all of our seat struts are designed where the clamps are flat. So what I normally do is put my fingers on either side and make sure it's got about the same clearance on either side. That way the strut's at the appropriate angle. On the left side, I'm gonna snug them up and not go near as tight. I still wanna be able to move it back and forth because I don't exactly know where I want it right now. So we're just gonna barely snug these up. Got it a little too tight, so let's back it out just a little bit. And as you can see, I can rock it back and forth. So I'm just gonna move it out a little bit, about where I think it'll be. And our struts are installed. Now, let me grab a 3/16 Allen wrench. Move over here to the front seat sliders, loosen these up. So both seat sliders are loose. So they're both loose. Now what I'll end up doing is leaving the right side loose for now, because I know where I want to locate the left side. Now on the size, to get your nose weight and all, usually you want to run this slide pretty much all the way forward. Now what I normally do is pull it all the way through until the bottom's out, move it back about 1/4 inch or so. So about right there. Go ahead and snug it up. Again, leaving the right side loose. Snugged up where it won't move. And now we're ready to go ahead and put our seat in here. So let's do that. Medium seat, go ahead and just slide it in here. Now at this point, obviously, you have to have something to hold the back of the seat up. You can have a friend help you. You can make something to work. I've actually had something made at Phantom many years ago. It's using an old weight bracket with a slotted flat piece of metal. It works pretty good. It just bolts directly to the axle. You know, if you know someone in a machine shop and you have an old weight bracket laying around, you can get them to slot you out a flat piece of metal and have at it. So it's a pretty good little tool to use. So we're going to go ahead and install that on the axle. Snug it up. Now again, if you don't have this, you just want to find something to help hold the seat where you want it to be as far as the height. You know, if you got a old 2x4 or something you want to slide in between the brake caliper bracket and, you know, something you can wedge in there to make work, fine. Like I said, you just got to have something to hold the back of the seat to get your heights correct. So with that being said, let's go ahead and grab a tape measure and see where we're at. This particular weight bracket, or the particular seat bracket, uses a 9/16 wrench, so I went ahead and grabbed it in case I need to move it. This particular customer is racing in Ohio, I believe, so we're going to mount it just a little higher than we normally do in the Southeast. As you can see, it's right around 8.5, maybe a tick below, so we're going to go ahead and bump that up. We'll try to get it up around 8 3/4. Again, I haven't even looked at the front of the seat right now. We're just roughing it in, just kind of getting it close to where we want it. Moved it up a little bit, snug it up with a wrench, see where we're at. Move the front of the seat over just a little bit. And you go just a little bit more. Didn't seem to move much there, so let's go a little bit more. Almost there. Like I said, we're just roughing it in right now. We'll come back and check it in a little bit, but we're just getting it close, so when we go to set everything, everything's about where you want it. Just a little bit more. Should be about right. Yep, that's pretty much 8 3/4 right there. So that's about where we want the top of our seat. I'm gonna grab 2 grommets and let me explain why we're doing this. If you noticed, on our carts, the left side rail does not sit completely flat on the ground. It's actually raised up. The reason for that is to get the left side frame rail off the ground. Our newer carts, all of them are designed like that. So this rail right here is not dragging the ground. Carts, you know, early to mid 2000s, they would actually rub this rail completely flat and obviously thin that metal out, change the dynamics of the chassis. So with that being said, the left side rail's picked up. So in essence, the floor pan, since it's mounted against that left side seat rail, it's trying to pick the seat up like that because it's not perfectly level. So you're going to grab these 2 grommets right here. Basically, you're going to use those to level the seat back out. So what I normally do is stick them underneath the right side, underneath the seat right there. Just push them up underneath, and you'll actually see where it picks the seat up and evens the seat out, where it gets it level. Again, so you're going from basically that right there. Stop the seat. That right there to put your grommets in, and you're going to that. Just picks up the right side of the seat. So that's just the way I've always mounted them since we've changed the design of the chassis. Now, we're going to start getting the seat close to where we want to mount it. We're going to look at the center line of the crotch area of the seat and the steering post. Normally what we like to do is offset the crotch area just slightly to the left from being perfectly centered with that post. And that's about where it is right now. Obviously, when you do that, you want to make sure that, you know, your right side strut and all is pretty close. Make sure that you're fairly close on the front, which we are. Now, all this stuff is going to have to get bent in order to contour to the seat. But again, we're just roughing it in right now. So we're just getting it close to where we want it. Let's go ahead and put my grommets back up under there. So that's about where I'm going to want to see the seat. Now, before we start marking and drilling holes, it's very important to get the contour of each mounting point even with the seat, so that way the grommets are matched up even, where it's got a good flush base to it, where there's obviously going to be no bind. So as you can see, let's get out of the way of the Nerf bar. This right here needs to be bent quite a bit that way. It needs to be turned because it does not match the contour of the seat. And most of the time, because we make so many different seats, you're going to have to do this on pretty much every mounting point, because the angles are not going to match up on every single seat. The right side slide is actually pretty close. It barely needs to be bent just a little bit that way. So we will have to bend that one just slightly. The right side, if you can tell, there's more of a gap on the front side than there is on the back side, so we're going to have to turn that strut that way. And then on the left side, let's go ahead and slide this in and get it close. Again, these clamps are designed to be, flat to the ground, so go ahead and get it where it's flat. See where you're at. Now the same thing on this one. It's going to have to, which you can't see it very good from the camera angle, but it's going to have to be turned that way. So let me go ahead and grab a large adjustable wrench. Let me go ahead and look these over one more time. Remember where I got to bend everything. And then we'll take the seat out and go ahead and start bending those brackets, again, for it to line up to the contour of the seat. So go ahead and remove your grommets from underneath the seat. Take your seat out. And like I said, try to remember where each mounting point needs to be bent. So large adjustable wrench, go ahead and open the mouth up a little bit. Now remember that this one needs to be bent this way, so let me go ahead and pull on this end. Bend it that way just slightly. This one had more gap on this side, so we're going to bend it that way some. Just barely. I mean, we're not moving them very much. This is very critical to mount your seat, again, to keep it out of a bind. On this one, it had more gap on this side, so we're going to try to bend it that way. Right side strut is always a pain to bend because it's pretty solid. So grab your Nerf bar on the other side, reach your hand out there and grab the Nerf bar. Go ahead. Try to twist it as best you can. Like I said, you're gonna have to put your back into this one. Right side strut's pretty solid. And just slightly twisting it. You can see where I twisted it slightly. Same thing on this one. This one should be a little bit easier than the right side. Just barely twist it. All right, just barely twist it. All right. Now, while we got the seat off, let me just go ahead and recheck the measurement on the right side seat strut. Again, we want to make sure this is 3.5 inches. Still at 3.5, so we're good there. Let me just leave my tape measure there so we can check the height. Slide the seat back in. Put your fixture in wherever you're going to hold it as far as getting the height correct. Slide the seat forward to your slides. Go ahead and put your rubber grommets underneath. Get your front center where it needs to be. Make sure your gaps and all are about correct. We're getting a lot closer now to mounting it. So let's go ahead and check our contours, make sure all of our mounting points look correct. As you can see, the left side is much better. We could probably bend it up some. It looks like it's falling away from the seat, so we'll need to work on that one a little bit more. Let's go over to this side. Same thing on that side. Looks like it needs to come up some, so we'll work on that one. I'm actually pretty happy with the right side. It's got about, it's pretty much touching the seat all the way around. Now, it's not going to be mounted there. It's going to be mounted a little bit further over because you got to leave room for the grommet. But I'm really liking the where we move that right side strut. So the right side strut's good as far as mounting points. Let's check the left side. Again, left side the same way. It looks very, very good. So the only thing we're gonna have to do is go back and adjust the front sliders. Before we do that, let's make sure that our seat height's correct, because obviously if it's not correct, it's gonna change the angle of those sliders. So we're still right at 8 3/4, has not changed. Let me double check our sliders, make sure which direction I wanna go in. Again, both of them up just a little bit. Let's go ahead and pop the seat back out. It can be a tedious process, but if you do it correctly, it's worth it in the end. If you do it correctly, you only have to do it one time. You don't have to worry about it being bound up or anything like that. So let's go ahead and grab this slider. Move the steering wheel out of the way. Again, it needs to just come up just a little bit. Just go ahead and bend it up just a little bit. Same thing with this one. Just a little bit. All right. Now that we've done that, we should be ready to rock and roll. Now at this point, I'm gonna grab another grommet, and I'll show you what I'm gonna do with it here in just a second. So let's go ahead and slide the seat in there. We know our seat height is correct now, since this is all locked into place. It's not moving around. It's exactly where it was earlier when we set it, so I'm not even gonna bother rechecking the height. I'll probably one time before we actually go marking and drilling and make sure that the right side strut is correct. But I got my grommets underneath the seat. You can see where the steering post is in relation to the crotch area of the seat. All that looks very good. Now, I grabbed this grommet. The reason I grabbed it, we're actually gonna check the gaps before we mark these holes. We're gonna check the gaps in the seats. As you can see, I can't put the grommet in there. So that's too close. So I need to move the seat back just a little bit. And I'm just doing this for a reference to myself to make sure I'm giving enough gap to where I mark the holes. You know, the grommets can fit in there. Obviously, if you're marking the holes and you don't leave enough gap for the grommets, you know, your holes aren't going to line up. So just leave enough gap in there for the grommet. Come over here to the right side. Now, I have not tightened the right side up, so at this point, grab your 3/16 Allen wrench. It's loose, so again, take your grommet, make sure you got enough gap. Should be pretty good right there. I'm gonna go ahead and snug it up. Now before I move to the right rear strut, I'm gonna take this grommet and double check it one more time, and it's good. All right, right side. Again, we're gonna check our measurement here, 3.5, good. Now, as you can see, this strut has a little bit of a rock back and forth, so I'm actually gonna go ahead and snug that up. But before I do that, I'm gonna make sure I got enough room for the grommet. At this point, I don't. So I'm gonna go ahead and move the seat over some. Should be good right about there. Now, if you notice, that moved the whole seat, so I'm gonna have to recheck the front. But before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and snug this up so it doesn't have a chance to move when I mark it. I wanna make sure that all those mounting points are correct. So let's go ahead and grab our 7/16 socket with the impact wrench and the 7/16 wrench. Go ahead and just, again, we're not tightening it down to the max. We're just gonna snug it up so it don't have that rock to it. Again, we want to make sure that we have the same gap on either side of the clamp. So just come back just a little bit, right about there. Crisscross pattern, snugging it up. We're not going all the way tight with it. We're just snugging it up a little bit more than it was before, so it loses that rock. So you don't have that rock now. Clamps about the same on either side. Check the grommet. It needs to come over this way just a little bit. As you can see, the grommet goes in there pretty easily, so it needs to come this way just a little bit. That's good. Double check the front. All right, left side is good. The right side, because we had to move the right rear of the seat, it actually gave a little bit more gap, so we're gonna loosen this up. Loosen up the slider, move it in. Check it with your grommet. Just make sure that has a nice tight gap. Go ahead and tighten it up. All right, so 3 of our 4 mounting points are in place. Last but not least, let's check the left rear. Looks a little close. Let's move it out some. Again, checking the grommet point. It's pretty close right there. As you can see, it does take a little force to get it in there. We don't want to make it go in there because it'll move the seat around. Make sure your clamp is pretty much flat. It is right there. Doing that made it a little looser, so let's move it in just a little bit. Make sure your clamp is flat. Now this don't have the rock from side to side, so I'm not going to worry about tightening that up because it's not going to change the position of the mount. So everything looks to be in place now, so we can go ahead and mark it. Check it over, make sure everything looks good. Everything looks great, so we're going to go ahead and mark it. Now, here's another trick of the trade that I was taught by my good buddy Frank Ash. Cotton swab primer. Before I use it on the seat, I usually like to set it at a 90-degree angle so I can get in tight spots a little bit easier. Take and just hit the end of your cotton swab with primer. Go ahead and load it up on there. That way it's easier to get in and out of these holes, and you can mark them pretty easy. I usually just go ahead and mark the center hole. Just go in a nice circular motion. That way you get the whole diameter of the hole itself. Each time you mark, I recommend go ahead and put more primer on the end. That way you have a nice, clean, and easy to see mark. Again, just go around the hole, get the whole diameter. There's two. One at a time here. I'll just kind of dab it. Dab it, go around the hole. Last one. Dab it around the hole. All right, everything should be marked. Now, be very careful when you take the seat out. You don't want to scrape it up against anything and, you know, lose your mark. So I usually try to take everything out of the way. I'm just gonna set it on the floor for now. Get your grommets out. Very carefully hold the seat up and remove whatever's holding the back of the seat. Grab the sides of the seat and pull it straight out. Again, so that way you don't scrape the marks and lose your marks. And as you can see how clear those marks are, and it's a perfect diameter hole. Each and every one of them's like that. So now that I got those holes marked, I'm gonna go ahead and drill each one. If you're very careful in, you know, each mounting position is where it needs to be, there's no way that you can bind the seat up at this point. Some folks, you know, they do it one at a time. You can do that to really ensure that you're not binding anything up, but I've never had an issue. Go ahead and drilling the holes now. So first step I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a small 1/8 inch drill bit to make sure I get the exact center point of each hole. That way it's the larger drill bit is not trying to walk on me. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and grab also, after the 1/8 inch drill bit, we're gonna use a 21/64, which is one size above your 5/16, which is the same size as your bolt. So you wanna go just one size above your bolt size. Again, 1/8 inch. Small drill bit, 1/8 inch. Go ahead and get the center of each hole. See how quick and easy that goes in? It don't walk or nothing on you. I always do small drill bit first. Each hole, again, just get the center, punch it out. Boom, boom, boom. Change your drill bits. Now we're going to the full size. This is the 21/64. Again, one size above the 5/16. Same process. Since we got that center hole, it's not going to walk on you. Push it right through. Drill each one. Now I'll go back and make sure that each hole's cleaned out pretty good. That way the bolt moves there pretty freely. All right. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and grab our nuts and bolts. Got 4 bolts. All your washers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Your 4 nuts, and then your grommets. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just start each and every bolt in each hole before I tighten anything up. Now you're going to want to put your washer against your head of the bolt. On the back side of the seat, make sure you always use your rubber grommet between the seat and the mounting point. Let's go ahead and start it in there, put it in your hole. Washer and then nut on the back side. And we're just starting the bolt and the nut to get all the mounting points where they need to be. Let's go over to the right side. Again. So again, we're just starting our nuts on our bolts. Just get everything lined up here before we start tightening anything. You really shouldn't have to pull or tug or force the bolts to go in each hole. They should just all freely go in there. I've not had any issues on mine. And just lining everything up, just pushing it down in the hole. Like I said, you shouldn't have to make it go in there. You just gotta line it up. If I can find it. See how free that goes in there? Just pushes right in. All right, so now that we got all of our nuts started, let's go ahead and tighten these bolts that we just started the nuts on. Once we get all those tightened, we'll go ahead and attach and tighten all of our hardware to the cart itself. So go ahead and snug everything up. We always recommend tightening up to a point where the grommet is slightly compressed. So tighten, tighten, tighten until you see that grommet just starting to compress. Right there, just barely compressed. You can see it right there. All right, go to the next one. Same process. Barely compress the rubber. Move on to the next one. Same deal. Now it's a little bit harder to see in the back, but you can feel when it gets starting to compress the rubber. It starts to tighten up the bolt itself. So at that point, just stop. everything's tightened. So let's go ahead and mount our struts. Not mount, but go ahead and tighten our struts. Our front sliders are already tight. We already tightened those earlier, so we're just going to tighten the rear struts. Before I tighten this, let me make sure we're still at 3.5, which we are, dead on the money, 3.5 inches. Tighten them up. Crisscross pattern. Back and forth. A little bit at a time. Again, this just ensures it has a good tightness all the way through. It's not more tight on one side than the other. That strut's tight. Let's move to the left rear. Same process. Back and forth. Now that we've done that, what I always do is go back and make sure that your front sliders are nice and snug. They aren't going to go anywhere. Tighten them up with your 3/16 Allen wrench. And the last and probably the most important step to these seat sliders is make sure you tighten this jam nut. Because if not, those bolts will actually back out. So make sure you go ahead and run the nuts up against the block that they're mounted in, and then take a 7/16 wrench and tighten them down so that way the nut don't back out. 7/16. Snug them up. That way they don't move on you. That side's tight. And your right side's tight. Now, I've never had one move, but I always go back and make sure that my seat height's correct, which it is. 8 3/4. We already checked the right rear seat strut. I know that my left front seat slider is where it's supposed to be. It has not moved. So, in all essence, this seat is mounted. It's properly mounted. It's ready to go. And we'll move on to the next step of our process. All right, guys. So the next step in our process is our motor mount. Gonna pop it out of this packaging. All right, so let's go over the pieces of the motor mount. This is your base plate. This is your top plate. These are your butterflies and the bolts for the butterflies. This is what goes underneath the frame and attaches the motor mount to the frame itself. Then in here is our attachment hardware. We got our studs, which is where the motor slides on top of and tightens to. And then we have our bolts that hold the top plate and the bottom plate together. Now in this instance, I'm gonna go ahead and set this motor mount up for clone racing, which is your 15 degree, your typical 15 degree mount that you normally see in flathead racing. And obviously our motor mounts come as a flip mount, so we have two different settings. This is your 15 degree setting. Obviously, like I said, that's the way we're gonna be setting this one up. Or you can actually flip it around, and that's your 8 degree animal setting. Obviously, it levels your bowl out for your animal racing. You can also change it around for, you know, different types of motors. I've seen people run the 8 degree setup with Predator motors and things like that to get the center of gravity lower, but again, today we're gonna set it up 15 degrees. So what I commonly do is go ahead and flip it over. You can actually see where you got 2 threaded holes right there. That's where your 3/8 hex head bolts are going to go into to attach the top plate to the bottom plate. So you can go ahead and lay it down, pop up here in your attachment bolt kit. washer. Thread it into your hole. I'll go ahead and thread them almost all the way down. That way there's less slop. And what I'll do is I'll take a tape measure, and we're actually going to measure the offset. So this is how the cart, or the motor mount sits on the cart. We're actually going to measure the offset this way, and we're going to measure from the right side over. So we're actually going to set it at 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and flip that over. What I normally do is set it up against the edge of a table like this and have it overhang. That way I can see where we got 3/4 of an inch. So let's slide it over where it's dead on 3/4. Take a 9/16 on your impact. Tighten them up so they don't move on you. And double check your offset. 3/4 of an inch down on the money. All right. So next step of our process, you need to grab a little bit of Loctite. You can buy this at Advanced Auto Parts, AutoZone. It's fairly cheap. I think it's $7 or $8. And it'll last you a long time because you don't use a whole lot of Loctite. So in order to put your studs in, the easiest way to do it is go ahead and jam two of your nuts together like you would on a weight. Go ahead and jam these two together. Basically, that'll act very similar to a head of a bolt where you can tighten the stud down into the threaded hole. Go ahead and jam these against each other. Snug them up. Take your Loctite, again, very little. Just put it right here on the end of the thread, just a little dab. Thread it in. Take your wrench. Go ahead and tighten it down. Alright. Same process on all 4 corners. Again. Jam the two together. Loctite, little dab. And all Loctite's doing is just make sure the stud don't back out when you go to loosen up your motor and stuff. Tighten it up. You always use your outer nut to tighten. If you go to do your bottom nut, like I've been doing when you're done, it'll actually loosen it up. So that's what I usually do to loosen it up. See how it loosens it up. Last one here. Motor mount is now ready to attach to the cart. Just gonna leave the nuts off for now. Obviously the nuts are gonna go on top of your motor. Let's go ahead and get your butterflies out. Butterflies come with 4 bolts and 4 of your AN washers. Make sure you put these AN washers underneath the head of each bolt. Slide them in there. Slide them in there. Alright, now these use a 1/4-inch wrench to go ahead and tighten up. So grab both of the butterflies and the motor mount. We'll go ahead and just stick it on the cart and just snug it up, just to have it on there. For the most part, your motor mount will always, the back of it will always line up to this rear seat rail. So for the most part, you'll pretty much have these two in line. So that's where we're gonna set it. Like I said, we're just gonna snug it up, just to put it where it's supposed to go. Start your nut. And same process as you would on your seat struts. In order to get a good even tightening load basically on the butterflies, you want to go to crisscross pattern. So I always start with the left rear, just snug it up, go crisscross, right front, right rear. We're just snugging them up at this point, left front, and then keep going back and forth until you get them all tight. Now, I'm not going to really over tighten them because obviously I don't have the motor or anything on it, but I just want to show you guys the process. And there you go. Motor mount is installed, ready to go. All right, so the next step in our process is preparing the cart to get the body mounted. So let's go ahead and, we're actually going to end up putting tires and wheels on it. So let's go ahead and pop these lug nuts off. I'm actually going to put these to the side for the customer. That way the first time they get used is actually by them. I don't want to mar up their lug nuts on my wheels. So I'll go ahead and just use the old set of lug nuts. I'll put these to the side. Just set them over here for now. Now, we want to mock up our cart as it would be to get ready to race. So we want to make sure all of our hubs are in the location where they need to be run. So that way, obviously, our widths and all are correct. We want to make sure our toe's correct, our camber is somewhat close. We want to get it all fairly close to how we're actually going to run it. So the way we measure our rear hubs is from the outside edge of the cassette to the outside edge of the hub. Typically on a scythe, the left rear will be at 4 1/4, right rear you'll be at 4 1/2. So this one's actually almost 4 1/2. So let's go ahead and loosen up these bolts. Slide it in some. We're going to set that to where this edge right here where the wheel sits is at 4 1/4. So 4 1/4. Go and tighten it up. This is how it's going to be ran. So go ahead and tighten it up. That way it's ready for the customer and to mount the body. Same thing on the right rear. Same type of measurement, but we'll be at 4 1/2 actually on the right rear. This one's actually around 4. Again, outside edge of the cassette to the outside edge of the hub where the wheel sits. Loosen up your pinch bolts. Slide out your hub some. See where we're at. Put it at 4 1/2. Tighten her up. Next thing we're going to do, I'm going to just eyeball the camber. I've done this enough years where I pretty much know where to set the camber. Typically on the left front, you're going to have it where you got a few threads showing on this side of the heim. So I'm going to back this off. Usually that puts you between that 1/4 and 1/2 degree range. So let's go ahead and expose a few threads right here. That looks about good to me. Again, we're just eyeballing it. It don't need to be exactly perfect, just close enough where, you know, your tires aren't really sticking out of the fender wells. That should be fairly close. Obviously, the next thing we're gonna have to do is set the toe, but we're just eyeballing this in. Typically on the right front, which this one looks pretty close. I'm actually not going to even mess with that. Usually I get it to where we're just a few, like 3 or 4 turns past where the hole lines up for the safety pin. And that one already looks like it's already there. And that usually gets in that 2.5 to 3 degree range. So now that we got that eyeballed in, let's go ahead and move on to our toe. Toe is critical in order to get the wheels centered and all on your wheel wells and everything. So let's go ahead and make sure you put your steering lock in. Obviously, we have already moved our heims all the way in, so you know both hubs are moved in that way. So go ahead and start threading them out some. Get it where it looks decently straight. You know, just thread them both out. Again, make sure your toe lock is in. Thread them out. Now, before I set the toe, I like to lock the brake. That way, my toe gauge ain't moving in the back. My laser ain't moving, so I'll take a pair of these Irwin quick grips and mash the brake pedal. Just snug it down. That way it don't move when you go to set your toe. Now, race ready, you're definitely going to want to set your toe with the driver in the cart on the stand. So just make sure that you recheck this after you set it for your body, because this is just eyeballing it in. When you get load and get weight on the cart, it's going to change your toe. So make sure you recheck it. Let's go ahead and grab our Akito ES. Again, camber is not going to be right because it's sitting on a stand, so don't even bother looking at the camber. We're just doing this to set your toe. Slide your mirror up on there. Alright, so our toe is actually hitting the Nerf bar right now, so we're going to go ahead and move it out, move it out, move it out. You can see it starting to line up to that 0. Once you get on the 0, go ahead and snug up your jam nuts. And grab 2 9/16 wrenches, go ahead and tighten it down. So let me go over there and grab my wrenches. Got one over here. I do. All right. So make sure you're still on 0. We're just snugging them up. All right. So we're now moving to the right side. Go ahead and put my nut back here on the spindle. Line up your holder, your safety pin, go ahead and put that back. Move over to the right side, same process. I'm gonna toe it out just like I would when I was racing. I'm gonna go 1/16 out, just like we recommend. Find your laser. Make sure your mirror is clean. As you can see, we're about right at a 1/16 out, so we'll go ahead and tighten it up. Make sure you're still at a 1/16. Move it so I am. Tighten her up. Tighten her up. Make sure both your heims are free. We're not binding anything up. All right, so our toe is set. Take our camber gauge off. Go ahead and take our toe system off. That's all ready to go. Release your brake. Put all this stuff up. Move on to our next step. All right, so let's go ahead and get ready to mount our Dzus springs. I mentioned earlier they came with your body mount kit. This is on a Champions Edition, and they'll also be included on your Elite Edition karts. So there's actually 3 different packs. The Nerf bar packs come with 4 springs, and obviously enough to do 4 tabs. Obviously our Recon chassis have 4, so they're included. So on the sides you'll get 2 extra. And then you also have your front bumper kit. Just make sure you keep these separated because the spring heights are actually different because the tabs are different thicknesses. So what I normally like to do is do them one at a time. So I'll do my Nerf bars first. When I'm done with those, I'll switch over and do the front bumper. So let's go ahead and do that. What I normally like to do is go ahead and pop open the kits and just lay them in the seat. That way they're all easily accessible when I go ahead and put the springs on. Get everything out. All right, now if you have not invested in one of these and you're riveting every so often, I recommend doing so. These are, fairly affordable for what they are. You can get them at Harbor Freight for fairly cheap. I can't remember how much I got it for, but it's outlasted me years, and it saves your hands a lot of stress and a lot of working when you go to rivet this stuff on. So this is an air riveter. And all you do is put your rivet in there, line it up to your tab. I usually like to line up both sides. That way, it's not hard to move it over when you do go ahead and rivet it down. Let's go ahead and pull it twice, and it's riveted on there. Just continue that same process all the way through. So let's go ahead and knock it out real quick. Again, these are the 300 thousandths height Nerf springs. You want to make sure that they are only used on the Nerf bars. Do not mix them up. That's why I say I do them one at a time so there's no error. Over to the right side. Now, since you're going to have 2 extras of these on the scythe, I recommend go ahead and put them somewhere where they won't get mixed up with your front bumper. Go ahead and take your front bumper, same process. I usually like to pour on the floor pan so it's a little bit easier to access too. Same deal. Rivet them up on there. Over to the left side here. All right, now if you notice, there's actually another hole here and another hole here. Now they are not required to run. You don't have to run them. They're there. It gives it a little bit more stability on the front. So if you want to purchase the additional springs, you can, but they do not come, with the kit again, because they're not absolutely necessary. It just gives the front bracket a little bit more stability in case of a hard impact. So we got all of our springs on. Let me show you a quick trick. This is just, again, getting it set up for our body mounting. We're just, everything's, getting everything ready to slide the body up on it. So what I normally do, the sights on the front bumper bracket, I use a 5/8 spacer, which is very similar to like what we use on our spindle spacers. This just gets your nose height close. And it's worked for me for several years. It gets it down pretty low. And that way you can mount the body low and then pick it up if you're on a rough track and your wheel clearances and all are still plenty good, because obviously you're raising it up off the wheels. But if you mount it high and want to mount it low, you're going to run into a problem with your wheel clearances. So I always mount the bodies low. Though if you do want to move them up high, there's not going to be any issues. So mount them down as low as you can. Like I said, 5/8 spacer between the front bumper bracket and the bottom of the bumper. You can see how I did that. Just on either side, just 5/8 spacer. Slide them in there. And then typically your bulldozer brackets, you want to run them all the way down, which that's where Tony already has them set. So ultimately the cart's ready to go ahead and get tires and wheels on it and slide the body and start mounting it. So we'll do that next. All right, guys, so we got our cart pretty much ready for the body to be mounted. Went ahead and put a set of tires and wheels with the close to average air pressure, 5 and 6 pounds, close to average stagger. Again, we're just mocking everything up to get it close to a race-ready type condition. So we'll go ahead and put it on the floor. You want to put on a nice flat surface. If you have access to a really nice, good, flat, big table, obviously that's a better option than having to work off the floor, but I don't have that, so we're going to work off the floor today. And I actually have a few different tools I like to use in regards to ride heights and things like that. So these are actually 1 1/8 square tubes, rectangular tubes. I think they're 1 1/8 by 3. And that's going to basically be what dictates your height all the way around. That's what I use for my heights. For the most part, it's right up against it. That's why I said that 5/8 spacer seems to work really good. The back ones are just a little bit higher, but again, you can't go any lower. So we're going to use that. It's basically our clearance spacer off the ground. So go ahead and put that on either side. Now, since we're mounting the nose first, I actually use a 2x4, and that just puts pressure up against the brackets. That way it's pressing up against the bottom of the nose, because again, the nose is going to be mounted first. So I like to use 2x4s. That way, if you see, it's actually right up against. It's right up against everything. That way it's pushing up against it. So when I go to mark it, it's pressing up against the nose. So now everything's in place. Let's go ahead and mock up the body. Just lay the side panels out first. Grab your nose. I just grab it by the pedals. Pick it up, slide it up underneath, like that. Now at this point, you want to make sure that either tire or wheel is not sticking out particularly further than the other. So you can actually take your hand on either side and kind of feel it out. That's normally what I do. Move it side to side. That way, side to side, you're about right. Now, we're going to work front to back here in just a second. Let me grab a couple clamps here. Again, we're just mocking everything up so we know where to mark it. So, side panel up there. Clamp it. Now, as you can see, the body is a lot further back than it should be, so we got to work on that. Just slide it forward some, slide it forward, slide it back, whatever, side to side. So let's go over to the left side. I got it reasonably centered. We're just getting everything close right now. Same deal. I'll put me a clamp on here and just get it close. The side needs to come forward, and it also, you can see where it's trying to stick out a little bit. It needs to go to the left side a little bit. So you can kind of get your hand in here and kind of feel the gap. Just move it around till you feel like everything is centered. So again, just stand back, walk around to take a look. Just moving that a little bit. Looks like the body's still, the nose a little bit further back, so we'll go a little bit forward. Again, you just want to align, you want to center everything up in the wheel wells. So center it up as best you can. Center it up. That side's pretty good. Let's go back over to the left side. Move forward just a little bit, not much. So everything's pretty well centered. Side to side is about right. We don't have the one sticking out any particularly further than the other side. Both wheel wells look pretty well centered. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and mark the nose and mount it to the cart itself. So what I normally do is grab a Sharpie. Now, you don't want to wear gloves if you don't want to get Sharpie all over your fingers, but what I normally do is just take the Sharpie, just pull the end out. If I can get it out, let me grab another one. Take a Sharpie, pull the end out. To me, I find it easier to get in those holes and mark them than it is with the cotton swab or anything else. So let's just go ahead. You're gonna reach your hand in there and just mark the holes as best you can. It's gonna be hard to do with this camera. All right, so if you can see, which you can't really tell, but each hole is marked. We got each hole marked. So at this point, we're gonna go ahead and drill those 4 holes. Go ahead and mount the nose to the cart. So go ahead and take your side panels off. Take your clamps off, take your side panels off. Pull your nose out. Now what I like to normally do is use your cart stand as kind of a table. It's easier to drill it. So you can see where we got our four holes there. Same as when you go to mount your seat, I like to use a smaller drill bit first. So I actually have this little tool here where you can actually drill at a 90-degree angle. It works very, very good for noses. Another tool you can find at Harbor Freight. My drill bit already my drill already has the 21/64 drill bit on it, which is what we're going to use from the seat. Same deal. Take and find your hole, find your mark, drill it. Again, small drill bit first. Go ahead and get your holes where they need to be so it don't walk on you. I've got those 4 drilled. Go ahead and change and put your correct drill bit size in there, which is the 21/64. Again, just one size bigger than a 5/16. Your Dzus buttons are 5/16. So what I normally like to do is turn the nose over and hold it right here in the center on your cart stand. Drill it through. So you got all 4 holes drilled. I'm going to remove your 2x4s. They'll no longer be needed. Now in this instance, this is where I like to use my old bent wheel. This is what I call my redneck floor jack. This works pretty good to hold the front of the cart up. Works pretty good. So grab your 3/16 Allen. I went ahead and put all my Dzuses and all in this cup right here, so they're easily accessible. 3/16 Allen wrench. Actually, let me grab this one. Now, if you noticed, your Dzus kit comes with these little washers. I'm not going to put them on because I don't know what this particular customer wants. They may want to take their Dzuses out every time. If I can get one out. So what these Dzuses do is they allow the Dzus button to stay with the body. So they slide over top of it after you put it in the body. So you'll put this in the body first, put your Dzus or your washer on top of it, and the Dzuses stay with the body. So if you're at the track or something and want to take it off real quick, you don't have to worry about losing Dzus buttons. But again, you know, if you want to take them off and put them in an ultrasonic cleaner or clean them up or something, you know, the washer is going to permit you from doing that. So I don't allow the customer to put them on afterwards if they want, so I'm going to leave them off for now. Let's go ahead and line your nose up. Get all four mounted in there. As you can see, all four holes, the nose is mounted. This time you can take out your redneck floor jack and we can start working on our left side panel. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is get my clearance lined up. My little tool there. Slide your side panel up against the Nerf bar. Slide it where it'll line up right there. Now, the first thing I do is mount this right here. Basically what this allows it to do is it gives it a pivot point. So it'll allow it to go in and out like that, and it'll also allow it to go up and down if you want to move it forward and back. And you know, it resists anything from trying to bind up. So I always mount right here on the outside edge first, then go to your side panel, and then finalize with one final bolt so it don't move anymore. So what I'll usually do is to give it a good flush mounting point, go ahead and clamp right there. That way it presses up against the nose and the side panel. Make sure all this is lined up here. Make sure you're on the edge right here, everything's lined up in here. Then go ahead and drill a hole right there. This will be one size above the 3/16, which is a 13/64 drill bit. I'm going to grab one of those out. Go ahead and grab your drill. All right, and just drill right close to that edge. Now you want to make sure you're not real, you're real close to the edge, because it'll actually pull through. You know, if you get too close to the edge, you can actually have the side panel and the nose separate, because it'll actually break right there. So try to get right in the center. You can feel underneath where the edge of the lip is on the side panel. So try to get it right in the center. Do it right out here toward the edge. Once you're drilled through the first layer, which is the nose, go ahead and just mark your side panel. Like that. Well, that one went all the way through. But what I normally do is mark it and then pull it out and drill it all the way through. That way it does not hit your tire and obviously cause a hole in your tire. So luckily I missed it right there, but like I said, I usually drill through the nose first, mark this, and then drill it through so you're not actually hitting your tire. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and run a bolt through it. These are 10/24. You'll need a 1/8 Allen wrench and a 3/8 regular wrench. Start your nut on your bolt there, and go ahead and snug it up. Grab a wrench. We're just snugging it up. Again, similar to I got floor pan bolt stuff. You don't want to bind anything up, so just snug it up to where you feel it gets tight. You don't want to keep tightening down. It can obviously cause it to break, so you don't want to tighten down too much. Now, at this point, we're going to put our side panel right up against our clearance block, basically. But in order to get the side panel off the tire, you can see it's very close right there. You can probably see it better on this side, but I can't even get my finger in there. So what I normally do is I have a small block right here. I believe it's about 3/4 of an inch thick. And actually put it between the side panel and the tire. And that just gives it that clearance. So when you go to mount this, you know, you'll press it up against your block. That way you still got your clearance in here. So that way it's not into the tire. So we got that all ready. Now one thing I will do, I'll grab a 1/4 inch spacer like what we use on our spindles. And I'll actually put this at the back of this mounting block. Now the reason I do that, it actually picks the side panel up like this, because when the driver sits in the cart, the back sits down more. And if you notice, if you mount that side panel square without any load on it, the side panel is actually going to be picked up at the front. So this just basically levels everything out. You know, and that way when it's loaded and it's on the track, the side panel sits level to the ground. So all that's pressed up against it. Let's go ahead and pull the end of our Sharpie out. Take your hand and press up against it. So that way the tabs are up against the side panel, and go ahead and mark them. Again, you want to press against the side panel and down against your ground clearance device. And mark each hole. Mark around the diameter as best you can. Put that back in your Sharpie. All right. Now there's a mark. You can pull that out. Go ahead and pull your block out. You can take your handy dandy 90-degree drill. Make it a whole lot easier to get in there, especially with the seat in the way. Tighten that up. Go ahead and drill your 3 holes here. Again, this is the smaller drill bit. That way it won't walk on us. You got all those 3 drilled. Go ahead and switch over to your 21/64s for your Dzuses. Go ahead and drill them straight through. 1, 2, and 3. Get out your 3 Dzuses. You need your 3/16 Allen wrench. One, 2, 3. And now since we have a rubber or a plastic bushing back here and there's nothing holding it as far as a pin or a bolt, sometimes when you're pushing down on it, pushing it in, it'll get bound up. So what I'll normally do is just knock it out a little bit, free it up some. That way when you go to drill your top bolt, it's not bound up. There it goes. You can see we still got some movement there, so we're good and free there. As you can see, we got a good flush surface right here. Everything got plenty of clearance now. I can stick my hand in there. Plenty of clearance. So go ahead and switch over to your other drill bit for your bolt. Try to get on the top right here. Again, try to center it. You can feel the backside. Right about there. Drill straight through. Bolt with a washer on either side of the bolt head and the nut. Make sure you do that. Again, just help keep it from breaking. Snug her down. We'll move over to the right side and do the same process. you can see, I can just barely move the bolt with the Allen wrench. If you get to a point and you're struggling to turn it, you got it too tight. And like I said, it could cause the body to crack or break right there. So you don't want to over tighten it. So, all right, let's go over to the right side now. And we're gonna do the same deal. Let me get my 1/4 inch spacer for the rear. Line your spacer up. Get your clamp. Back side here. Make sure it's pressed up against it. Get that line up straight there. Feel your inner edge. Try to go center. Outside edge right here. All right. Now we're just barely drilled through. Like I said, mark it with a drill bit. Pull it out and you can see where that mark is. That way you're not drilling into your tire. I got lucky on the other side. And bolt it up, tighten it up. Just enough to have a little tension on the nut. There you go. All right. Spacer at the back. Again, the cart's heavier in the back, so it'll try to squat down in the back. So I pick it up right here. You can see how I've done that. Same process as the left side. Right side normally has more clearance. You usually don't have to worry about putting a block or anything under the tire there just because it has more clearance. So I usually don't put anything there, but you'll still do the same deal. You push it up against the Nerf bar and down against the ground. So pull your end out of your Sharpie. Mark your 3 holes. Go ahead and move your spacer out. Now, you got a lot more room to get in on this side, so you don't necessarily have to put your 90-degree drill bit on there. I usually just leave the same drill bit I use for, these bolts here for the right side. Again, just so it don't walk on me. 1, 2, 3. Come back on the front side with your full-size drill bit. Again, the only reason I use that smaller drill bit is so it don't walk. I want to make sure I hit the center of each one of those holes so everything lines up. 1, 2, 3. Take your 3 Dzus buttons and your 3/16 Allen wrench. Put them in there. Line up to your hole. Now the last one, you can either go on top right here or you can go on the side. I usually like to go on the side, that way when it does try to flex up and down, this kind of has that going on there, so it don't make it as rigid. So I usually like to go on this plane right here. Make sure when you drill it, you're trying to stay off your tire, so try to do it more toward the inside edge. Again, feel where the edge of the lip on the side panel is so you can get centered. Right about there. Grab your nut. Make sure you put a washer on either side. Take your wrenches and go ahead and tighten that down. As you can see, the body is mounted Everything is centered. There's no binding. We're ready to race. All right, now if you guys noticed earlier, I said not to go ahead and tighten that bolt completely down right here on your fairing. That's because we want to get this angle of the fairing right with the body on the cart. So obviously you can see where it's sticking up in the front right here. So with it being, you know, snug but not tight, we can actually take and move it down. We can get kind of eye level with it and make sure that it's at a pretty good plane with this area right here. So when the air comes up over top, it's not actually getting trapped underneath the fairing. So that spot looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and give her a good tighten now. Grab your half inch wrench. Actually left it over here in your socket. Go ahead and really tighten that down good so the fairing don't drop on you when you race. I've had it happen a couple of times, and it's really not fun having to battle with the fairing in between your legs. So go ahead and grab your cotter pin. You can cotter pin it at this point. Cotter pin's cut. Now your fairing is successfully and completely mounted, and we can move on to our next step. All right, so since this cart came with a startup kit and obviously came with the throttle assembly, so let's go ahead and attach that. Since I'm assembling this for a customer, I'm just going to leave the L bracket and the clevis up to them. Obviously, it's going to depend on the motor and all, so we're just going to put that to the side and leave it for them. We go ahead and put the throttle cable, the throttle housing, and then obviously the fittings on the cart. So what you'll need for that is two 7/16 wrenches and a 10 millimeter. The 10 millimeters for your throttle pull. So let's go ahead and get this over to the cart. Now we got the body mounted. We can use the body as a shelf for us. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and put this fitting on. You can see that one side has a nipple, one side has a straight edge. Go ahead and put that straight edge into your bracket. The other side is for the housing itself. Take a 7/16 wrench, go ahead and tighten it down. About as tight as it'll let me. At this point, I'm just going to lay my throttle housing there, and I'm actually going to feed the throttle cable through, first of all, the pull. So we're going to take the pull off. You may have to extend your throttle a little bit to get it off. So obviously the non-ball end goes in. Pull it through, run it through your fitting. Again, this is without the housing on the fitting just yet. So go ahead and feed it through there. If I can get it to go. There we go. And pull all the way through. And then what you're gonna end up doing is this pull is going to thread up onto your throttle rod. And what I like to do is use the lock nut and the pull as a jam nut against each other, so there's no way for it to back apart. And you want to make sure that you're not squishing the ball, or the ball can actually come detached from the throttle cable. So what I'll normally do is take your 7/16 and run your jam nut or your lock nut and move the throttle pull in with your finger until you feel it where it's starting to get tight with your finger. Just keep running it in just a little bit. It won't take much. feel it. So, you know, I'm tightening it with my finger and there's a little bit of gap. So that's about where I want to keep it. So I'm going to take my 10 millimeter and put it on the throttle pull. And then run this lock nut against a throttle pull and use the two together as a jam nut. This will keep the throttle pull from trying to back out. It'll keep the ball from trying to get smushed inside the throttle pull against the rod. It's a pretty good way to do it. So just tighten the two against each other. Again, works as a jam nut. So now your throttle cable is attached. Now we just gotta put the housing over top of it. So run your throttle cable all the way through the housing. Pull it on through. Run this up. I'll take two 7/16. One on the fitting, one on the housing. Just tighten up against it. Tighten it up. Obviously the customer is going to have to use this fitting on top of their motor. So I'm just gonna thread it on there. Just snug it up my fingers. I'll be ready for when the customer wants to put it on the motor. And now your throttle cable and the housing is installed on your throttle rod. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and put together our fuel tank. This pack right here is all the internals you're gonna need for the tank itself. Now these internals come pre-packaged from the manufacturer, and they actually fit a few different type of tanks. So all you're really gonna need is this fitting, the cap, and basically the enclosure for that fitting. Everything else can be tossed in the garbage because it's not used for this particular tank. So what I normally like to do is go ahead and put your pickup tube down in there. Now, if you can see, you want to basically aim that pickup tube for the bottom right rear corner. Basically what that's going to do is when the cart goes to the corner and the fuel sloshes over to that side, and make sure that your fuel is constantly picked up. You don't want it way over here on the left side, so that way if you're low on fuel and the fuel gets tossed over to the right side in the corner, you know, you still got some fuel getting picked up. So as you put it in that corner, kind of feel it right there with my finger, pull it out, take your fitting that's going to fit over top of it and figure out where it's going to sit in regards to it, and then cut just a little bit below it. And that'll put your pickup tube down in that right rear corner we were talking about. Like I said, that's most of the time you don't have to worry about it, especially with clone motors and stuff, because usually you don't run out of fuel. But you know, if you're running bigger motor stuff, it's very beneficial to have it down in that corner like that. So straighten that fitting out. Put your cap on. Now when you're ready to put it on the cart, go ahead and pop your collar out. I'll go ahead and take these off. You're gonna have to take them off anyway to put on the cart. So now what I normally do is thread this in and get it about halfway inside the collar. Get it about halfway. Go ahead and run your lock washer on there and then just run it up. I'm actually going to thread this in there just a little bit more. Now you can, you can use I think it's a 4 or 5 millimeter Allen wrench on it, but I usually just hand tighten it. Just get it where, basically you got enough threads in the tank and enough threads in the collar to hold it, and just hand tighten it to where it basically compresses your lock washer. So tank's ready. Let's go ahead and put it on the cart. Again, 3/16 Allen wrench. Go ahead and slide it in there. Usually you got to slide it in from the right side so it clears the steering shaft. Slide it in there. Put on your steering shaft. Steering post, I should say. Make sure both bolts get started evenly. That way you're not clamping harder on one side than the other. Just go ahead and run them in. Fuel tank's installed. All right, again, so this customer got the startup kit, which includes the chain. We're just gonna go over quickly how to put the chain on the cart. Typically for your common size gears, anywhere from a 13 to probably a 17 on the clutch to on the back, you're around a 60, give or take 3 or 4 teeth. You'll typically run a 40.5-inch gear or a 40.5-inch chain. And basically that puts your motor in line with that rear seat rail we talked about earlier when we put the motor mount on. So just lay your chain out on the table flat like that. We typically don't run the master link simply because it can pop out and cause issues you don't want to have. So just measure your chain 40.5. Again, this is for your common size gears. If you're running the mini gear system, you'll have to do some calculations. Either that or just lay the motor or the motor mount on the cart and figure out what length chain you need for that particular gear. So go ahead and 40.5 inches. Put it in your chain brake. And make sure it's pressing against that pin evenly. There you go. Push it on through the other side. And now pull your excess chain off. You don't need it, throw it in the trash. Bring your chain brake over to your cart. Slide your chain over your axle. Pop your chain back together. Slide it in your chain brake. Again, make sure that the pin is going in that bolt evenly. You don't want it skewed or angled one way or the other. So it's good in there. It's good and flat in there. Go ahead and tighten it up. Tighten it down until you have about the same amount of the pin protruding from either side of the chain. So go ahead and tighten it down. Push it on through the other side. Back it out. Looks good. Chain's on the cart, ready to go. I'm gonna go over something real quick. I get asked quite a bit, and it doesn't necessarily have to be part of the cart assembly, but it's a little, tidbit of information you guys might want to know. Is basically how to attach the rear bumper to the cart, keep it loose, but the bumper not fall off. And an easy way to do it, Harold actually taught me this several years ago. And loosen your bumper up. Loosen it up and you can take a quarter, a washer. This is one of the thick washers we use on our camera heims. Obviously you've seen where I've used them before. Just something thick enough where you can put it in there and basically wedge it between the frame and the bumper. That way basically it gives an air gap between the bumper and the frame itself, and just snug it up. As you can see, it's staying in there now. Do the same thing on this side. Hold it up against it, tighten it up. And then just snug up either side. That's all you really gotta do, snug them up. You wanna tighten them up enough where they're not gonna pull out. I've seen people where they just loosen the bumper up and they think loosening the Allen bolts up is loosening the bumper, but it's gonna fall off. So you do this, the bumper should not fall off. Take a pair of pliers. Just go in there with a pair of pliers and just pull your little washers or spacers or quarters, whatever you got, pull them out. Your bumper's loose. and we tighten them up enough where it ain't gonna fall off. So there's a good, easy way to keep your bumper on, but keep it loose.
All right, guys, there you have it. We got this brand new Champions Edition scythe complete. It's ready to get on the scales, obviously the motor and tires and wheels and things like that. But we've done our job. It's complete. It's ready to go. I'm sure there's a few things that maybe I missed or you guys have questions about. So feel free to contact me. Contact us at Phantom. We can be reached at the shop at 704-855-3165. You can email us at phantomracingchassis@gmail.com. You can also look us up on social media at PRC Nation 89. I also have my personal Facebook page. Look up James Stanley Racing. And any of those platforms, we'd be glad to help with any questions you have. Otherwise, I appreciate you watching the video, and we hope to have more coming for you soon. See you guys.